How's it going, everybody? Welcome. Thought I would do a video. Let me get back into the swing of doing videos, and what better way than to start talking about horror, of course, because if you know me, that's what it's going to be, right? I didn't need to rhyme there. I've got a few horror topics lined up, but today I want to get into something, well, controversial. And when I mean controversial, I mean that in two ways. This evening's topic will be analyzing Stephen King novels. Now, controversial one because how dare I? It's controversial of me to want to analyze Stephen King novels, right? Second reason it's controversial is because have you opened a Stephen King book recently? Have you ever? You might be surprised. If you haven't, you might be surprised at the chatter that's been going around for the last 40, 50 plus years that Stephen King has been writing. I know I was when I first read my first Stephen King novel last year. Believe it or not. So, why I'm making this video? Full disclosure: couple reasons. One, I think it's only fair that I talk about Stephen King because I write in the horror genre myself, and he is considered to be the best, one of the greatest writers of all time, one of the, if not the greatest horror author. But I'm hot take. I'm going to question that. That's why we're here today, right? That's why we're here in the afternoon. I said evening at the beginning. Um, but yeah, hot take. I think that's a. I think that's a bit of a push. I think it's a little much to say that Stephen King. Obviously, he's the best modern day horror author, but I think you should put an asterisk next to his name because there's a lot of controversial shit in his novels. If you've never read one, right? Second reason, my mom used to love reading Stephen King novels. Of course, now I know because she never told me like about all the controversial stuff because she read them when I was younger. But but this is a little homage to my mom who likes Stephen King. And third, because I want to start making some more videos, and what better way than to start off with a topic that everyone can relate to or enjoy about Stephen King. Although you might not enjoy this because I'm going to dissect Stephen King, even though it says analyzing Stephen King novels. Uh, so, one thing I do want to get right out of the way, this is about the novels, not the films. I am one of those people that can absolutely say, oh, I've never read the book, but I have seen the novel. But that we're not doing that today. We're not doing that. I've seen plenty of Stephen King films. I've only read one of his books, but even I know that as a horror fan, I have to look into like all the content and type of stuff that he writes about. I also have a friend who has recently started reading Stephen King novels, and from what she tells me, it's bad. Like I already knew of controversial stuff in his novels. I never realized the depths of how bad it was until I read The Shining, and then she started reading more of his novels recently. And I remember getting a message at least once every couple of hours, like, Justin, you're not going to believe this. I'm reading it, and this happened. I'm reading Misery, and this happened. And of course, the only novel of Stephen King's that I have read is The Shining, because if you know me, obviously, I don't need to tell you, The Shining is my favorite Stephen King story of all time, favorite film of all time as well. So basically, what I'm going to do here is I do have a list on my phone of some films. See, I've already done it. Of some novels that have controversial stuff in them, and there's also a list that I found on Screen Rant. So I'm going to start with the list on Screen Rant, and we're going to go over their list, and then I'm going to go over my list as well. And obviously, some of them I don't know anything about, so we'll both be learning at the same time. But for the ones that I am aware of, I will absolutely give you my thoughts on it as well, since I might have known about it. So without further ado, analyzing Stephen King novels. So like I said, I'm going to start with Screen Rant. 6 most controversial moments in Stephen King books. They start off number 6 with Sheldon's amputation, Paul Sheldon's amputation in Misery. Now, before I even read anything, how many people knew that Paul Sheldon's leg in Misery was amputated in the novel? Notice I'm not raising my hand. I didn't know that. In the movie, we all know what Kathy Bates does to James Caan, right? She puts that block of wood in between his legs, then takes the sledgehammer and just goes to town. That was bad. And you actually saw his leg twist. That's bad. Seeing that, and that just broke his leg. But in the book, apparently, that shit gets amputated altogether. So let's read together, shall we? The amputation scene showcases King's ability to create truly disturbing and unforgettable moments in his writing. So this is kind of the lesser of controversies. I'm just going to throw that right out there. Amputating a leg in a horror novel to me seems perfectly normal. But I think if we have to start somewhere, let's start with the norm, okay? The scene is particularly disturbing as it involves not only the physical removal of Sheldon's foot, but also the subsequent cauterization of the wound, a propane torch, adding an extra layer of horror to an already nightmarish situation. And then, of course, it talks about the film adaptation. Additionally, the amputation scene might have been considered too shocking and controversial for mainstream audiences, potentially overshadowing the film's psychological thriller elements. The novel's unflinching portrayal of Wilkes' sadistic actions and Sheldon's suffering adds to the overall atmosphere of terror and helplessness, making the reader feel the protagonist's pain and desperation on a visceral level. So again, I think absolutely that they didn't show his foot being amputated in the movie because that would have been a ridiculously gruesome scene. And let's be honest, Misery was made in the 80s. Even though they were doing a lot of controversial shit in the 80s, David Cronenberg was not directing Misery, right? Also, as much as Stephen King probably wanted to push that forward, even he knew, he's like, you know what? That's a little bit too much. But me personally, that doesn't sound as bad. That's not even controversial in my opinion, because the amputating of someone's leg in a horror novel seems totally normal to me. That's We haven't scratched the surface of to what I think is controversial when it comes to a Stephen King novel, but we will, and you will hear full disclosure on what I think of them. I won't skip any, but I will. I'll tend to like not talk about some as much. Number 5, according to Screen Rant, Sue's miscarriage in Carrie. Again, that's not in the film. If it is, it went over my head every single time I've ever watched Carrie. King does not shy away from depicting the emotional and physical toll that such a loss can have on an individual. The revelation of Sue Snell's miscarriage in King's debut novel Carrie stands as one of the most controversial and emotionally charged moments in the book. This plot point occurs after Carrie's rampage at the prom, during which she unleashes her powers on her classmates, resulting in the countless deaths and deconstruction. In the aftermath of this horrific event, Carrie has a conversation with Sue, who had shown her kindness earlier in the story. Carrie reveals to Sue that she is pregnant with a girl, only for Sue to later suffer from a miscarriage due to the stress of the carnage. So that's very much different from the in the film. Carrie kills everyone. The girl Sue survives, but Carrie gets killed as well in the school. So that's a totally different take. Obviously, we're I think five. I think at five, a miscarriage in a horror novel at five, we're getting there. The surface has been scratched, right? I don't know why I did that like I'm a fucking cat. But yeah, again, it's controversial because you mentioned miscarriages in books. Like, what are you doing? That's a big no-no, right? Like, but it's there, and basically, King, I feel, is being raw here. He's being real. He's giving you the overall reality. Why wasn't it in the film? I don't know that we'll get that. I love how people will message me when I'm busy, but when I'm not busy, nothing. King's decision to address this difficult subject matter head on adds depth and realism to the story. Like I just said, it has that raw reality, right? Why wasn't it in the? I don't know. I don't know why it wasn't in the film. I guess maybe a little too controversial, a little too taboo, you know, of a topic. Um, but again, you ain't seen nothing yet. Number four, Roland sacrifices Jake in the Dark Tower. I'm not familiar whatsoever with the Dark Tower, both film wise and novel wise. My mom always, as growing up, my mom always kind of just stirred clear away from the Dark Tower. I don't know, but we'll still go over it, obviously. The film adaptation of The Dark Tower chooses to omit this controversial scene altogether. Okay, so one thing I have noticed so far through three of the six controversial things in Stephen King novels here is what happens in the novel does not happen in the films. I wonder if that's King's decision or the director's decision. I would think it would be King's, but then again, I have heard some things. All right. The Dark Tower series includes a gut-wrenching and morally complex moment in which the protagonist, Roland, faces an impossible decision that ultimately leads to the death of his young companion, Jake. This scene, which occurs when Jake is hanging precariously from a crumbling bridge, begging for Roland's help, forces the gunslinger to choose between saving the boy's life or continuing his quest. The controversy surrounding this scene stems from Roland's decision to prioritize his mission over the life of a child, allowing Jake to fall to his death in a moment that haunts Roland throughout the rest of the series. The decision to sacrifice Jake for the sake of the quest raises difficult questions about the value of individual lives, the greater good, and the consequences of single-minded devotion to a cause. Roland's choice to let Jake die can be seen as a reflection of unwavering commitment to reaching the Dark Tower, even at the expense of his own humanity. In today's context, this scene may be viewed as particularly problematic, as it seemingly condones the sacrificing of a child's life for the sake of a larger goal, a notion that many would find deeply unsettling and unethical. The decision to leave out Jake's tragic death at the hands of Roland may have been influenced by the desire to streamline the story from the screen, and to avoid alienating audiences with such a dark and morally ambiguous moment. Even though Stephen King criticized the film adaptation, the, the visual depiction of a child falling to his death, coupled with the emotional weight of Roland's choice, could have been deemed too intense or disturbing for a mainstream film adaptation. Okay, on one end, there's a lot of layers to this. I'll try to break it down as easily as I can, and not fall over my own words. I read a little bit more because I wasn't familiar with it. So, from one standpoint, okay, so we're dealing with that whole would you do this over this, right? It's the trolley complex. You can save you can save people doing this, but you have to sacrifice this. That's what that is. But herein lies the controversy. We already know. Let's not beat around the bush. Let's not sugarcoat it. It's a child being sacrificed here. And that's why we're here. Because you will notice a pattern in Stephen King's books. children being sacrificed or killed for the, I guess, greater good. I don't know. A lot of weird stuff going on, right? So at number 4 here for Screen Rant, we get this decision, and it does sound a little crazy, right? It sounds a little controversial, watching a child fall to their death off of a bridge just so that you can continue your quest. To me, it doesn't really sound like that big of a deal. And also, I would say that Stephen King used a child because he wanted to emphasize that the quest was a bigger deal, and he knew that by having a child fall to his death, that would be like just a little heartstring of controversial, just the right amount that will make people go, wait a minute, I have to stop reading for a minute. That's a bit too much. And then some people will rationalize it and say, hey, I get his reasoning for moving on, while others are still stuck on the bridge with the child going down with him. But you see, like, there's a balance there. It's, again, to me, it's the trolley complex. But still, we haven't scratched the surface. And I'll be completely honest with you, I already know what number 1 is, and that will actually dip me into the number 1 controversial moment on Screen Rant will actually get me to transition to my own list. Because I'll be honest with you, the number 1 reason, the number 1 controversial moment, not even controversial in my opinion. No. But we'll get there. We'll get there, right? Number 3, Tad's death in Cujo. Again, it's been a while since I've watched Cujo. I've never read the book. The only thing that I do know about the book is that the scene in which they're in the car drags on for like 10 pages or 12 pages. I could be wrong. If you watch this video and you've read Cujo, feel free to correct me. But I do remember my mom saying years ago that she had read Cujo, and she's like, you think watching the scene when they're in the car is bad? Try reading it. It's just dragged on way too long. Cujo, for those who live in a nutshell and don't know what it's about, is about a killer Saint Bernard. I believe he's a Saint Bernard in the book too, yes? Killer Saint Bernard, rabid Saint Bernard. Yeah. So Tad's death. Tad is the child in Cujo. Once again, a child dies. Stephen King has a pattern, folks. Don't make me say it. The death of a child in a story, particularly in the manner depicted in Cujo, is highly sensitive and emotionally charged subject. So I will let this person's words say it for me. The untimely and tragic death of five-year... Stephen, what are we doing? What are we doing, Stephen? In Stephen King's novel Cujo, serves as a shocking and unsettling reminder of the story's unflinching approach to horror. In the book, Tad succumbs to heat stroke while trapped in a car with his mother, Donna, as she desperately fights off the rabid St. Bernard in Cujo. This devastating turn of events deviates from the novel's supernatural threats instead of focusing on the terror that can arise from seemingly ordinary sources. King's bold decision to kill off such a young child in a narrative in a disturbing choice that highlights the character's helplessness. The death of a child in a story, particularly in the manner depicted in Cujo. Yeah, I already read that part. The death of a child in fiction is considered to be even more taboo or problematic, as it taps into the deep-seated fears and challenges societal norms surrounding the protection and sanctuary of children's lives. When adapting Cujo for the screen, the 1983 film version made a significant departure from the novel's ending by ultimately sparing Tad's life. The decision to revive Tad at the end of the film illustrates the challenges inherent in adapting King's work for the screen. So, we're at number 3, and as you can tell, that's the pattern. That to me is the controversy in Stephen King. The controversy in Stephen King's novels. The pain, suffering, and death of children. Why is it there? Why does it exist? I don't know. Probably because Stephen King realizes that that's probably one of the worst things that can happen to someone. That's probably one of the worst things that someone can read about in a book. But that doesn't make it okay. Uh, I didn't realize. I thought the kid was going to get. Full disclosure. It was in Cujo. I thought maybe the dog attacked him. That probably would have been even more effed up. Um, the kid succumbing to heat stroke in the car. I can see why it's controversial just because of the whole sense of like they're fighting off this dog, and for 1 second, the last thing you're thinking is that the kid's gonna die, probably as you're reading this, right? So when he does die, and it's because of heat stroke, you're like, wait a minute, but why would you kill a kid off like that? Why would you kill a kid off to begin with, and why would you kill him off like that? That's crazy. So, and why did they leave it out of the film? Because again, when Cujo was made, and also even now, like, let's be honest, nobody wants to see that. You know, nobody wants to see that. We move on. Oh, number two. Oh, that's number two. I apologize. I do not know what number one is because I thought number two was number one. So, okay, let's see what is number one then. Yeah. Okay. When I get to one, I'm just gonna read what it says, and then we're gonna very carefully move on. Number two is Jack disfiguring his own face in The Shining. So, you want to hear something funny? I read the novel. I told you in the beginning, The Shining is the only book that I had read. I had forgotten that this was in the novel. But do you want to know why? Because to me, there are far, far more fucked up things that happen in the Shining novel than Jack disfiguring his own face. Now, think about that. Someone disfiguring their own face is pretty messed up, right? I think it is. I absolutely agree with you. But I think that there's other shit in that novel that is way more messed up, way more taboo, and way more disturbing and does not need to be written on a page over Jack Torrance fucking up his own face. So we'll talk about this. I will talk about one afterwards, but then we're probably going to go back to two just so that I can transition over to my list. Uh, In a disturbing display of self-mutilation, Jack Torrance, the protagonist of the Stephen King novel The Shining, disfigures his own face with a mallet at the height of his descent into madness. This shocking act of violence, which occurs as Jack pursues his wife and son through the hotel, shows the depth of his mental deterioration and the extent to which he has become a threat to his own family. The scene is described in vivid detail by King and adds an extra layer of horror to an already intense and unsettling climax as the reader is forced to confront the grotesque physical manifestation of Jack's inner demons. So maybe it's because I like The Shining so much, because it doesn't happen in the film, and because that sounds natural and normal to me for a horror novel, that I don't really find, like, yes, I think it's messed up. It's disturbing. It's dark. But again, what I consider more disturbing than this seems way more unsettling and unnatural to me than Jack Torrance just profusely beating his own face with a mallet. The act of self-harm, particularly when it's severe as this, can be seen as gratuitous or exploitative. Exploit, exploitative, Jesus, serving only to shock and disturb without adding meaningful depth to the story. There's another thing. In a lot of cases in horror novels, you will come across pointless scenes. In horror, we call this shock. Well, you'll see it in horror films as well. A scene that's so disturbing that the only reason that it's in there is to get your attention. It's added for shock value. Hot take: I've seen two Terrifier films. To me, they're pointless, they're gross, and there's no plot in them. Both Terrifier films to me serve as, they're just shock value films. There's no plot going on, and it's just, hey, what crazy way can Art the Clown kill this person? So basically, what they're saying here is Jack Torrance mutilating his own face. You could, if you really looked into it, you could say, like, okay, we want you to see the demons that are going on inside of his head, telling him what to do. But at the same time, does it really need to happen? Does a man really need to bash in his own face to the point of unrecognition? In mutality, is mutality a word? If it's not, I just made it up. You're welcome. Is that really necessary? For a, since it's horror, I would say yes, go forward with that. But at the same time, in the detail and the manner in which he does it, at that point in the film, yeah, I would probably say no. Kubrick's decision to leave out the face disfigurement scene may have been influenced by a desire to keep the focus on a psychological horror. Also, Kubrick and King did not see eye to eye in the film. I don't think I need to say that. That that should be already out there. That's one of the things that we know now. I would absolutely say The Shining is definitely more of a psychological film than it is in the book. So, and it wouldn't have made sense, beside the fact that it would be controversial. The number one screen rant of the most controversial things in a Stephen King novel is the child orgy scene in It. I'm not going to go into detail about this. If you've heard about it, you know about it. It's there. Um, I'll just base this final one off of what my friend told me. She just finished. She actually just recently finished reading it, and I had mentioned this scene to her, and she's like, "I haven't gone to that." And she's like, mind you, there were things in it before she got to that scene where she was like, "Jocelyn, this is bad. Like, there's like unnecessary swears, like the way in which the one of the characters is the girl. She's talking about herself in such a way." And then she got to that scene, and I think I got a voice note from her. That's how bad it was. Because she was like, "Oh my god, it's really bad. Like, it's bad." And like, I already knew about it, so like hearing someone else describe it to me, I was like, I don't even know what to tell you. I won't read it also because, not because of that, but just because it's so damn long, and because someone just told me how disturbing it is. We'll just delve into it. The scene continues to be a source of discomfort and controversy. Beverly suggests that the only way to escape their predicament is for all the boys to have sex with her. Because yeah, that's that's totally normal in a book where kids are the protagonists, and whatever the heck it is, Pennywise the dancing clown. Although, spoiler alert, if you don't want to be spoiled, cover your ears or mute this. Pennywise is not really depicted as a clown that much in the novel. My friend also told me that. I found that really interesting. However, both of them have him as a spider at the end, which is just so fucking weird to me. It raises significant concerns about the exploitation and sexualization of minors in fiction. The 1990 television adaptation and the 2017 film version of it chose to omit the graphic sexual content entirely. Well, don't you have to? I what? Why does that have to be said? You can't depict it because it wouldn't be legal. While Stephen King has attempted to explain the scene's purpose as a metaphorical connection between childhood and adulthood, the fact remains that the scene continues to be a source of discomfort and controversy. I mean, why would you think putting a scene like that into a novel, mind you, whenever it, the novel was written in the 80s, I'm assuming. But given the content of what that is, why would you think that would be okay to put in a book? And again, this is what we're talking about. This is what Stephen King loves to do, right? He likes to exploit or show children getting killed or in like adult situations. Is that horrific? You know what I mean? Like the stuff that scares us we see in film. Like like all the Saw films, Friday the 13th, Terrifying. Like that's bloody gruesome horror. That's a killer going after people. And Stephen King knows that that's what horror is. That's what gets us going. But the whole idea to add children to the mix for whatever narrative that goes on in his brain, he thinks, well, that's controversial. That's also that's real horror. And it's like it is, but like when you start branching off into like other things, like that scene in it doesn't add anything, Stephen. It doesn't add anything. It makes us take a step back, question you as a writer, because the fact that to me that people haven't canceled Stephen King for the shit he did, why aren't people canceling Stephen King for that? Like crazy, right? So yeah, that was Screen Rant's top 6. It's kind of weird, not 5. Top 6 things. My God, the notifications I'm getting. But yeah, so we're gonna branch. I don't know why I made that sound. We're gonna go back to The Shining for a minute because I have a bunch of films that I want to talk about here. Some of them I've already mentioned. Let's start with The Shining. Remember, you heard me say at least twice that I don't think Jack mutilating his own face was the most fucked up thing in the novel. Given what I just told you about what happened in It, that doesn't happen. But there are some other very questionable scenes in the novel. So again, if you don't want to be spoiled, you can mute this, you can end this, I don't care. But I'm going to educate you and hopefully prepare you. Look at it this way. If you've never read the Shining novel and you're like me and you love the film and you've been like, oh, I've always wanted to read the novel, let me help you. It's controversial in several different ways. I'll start off with the weird part. There's a part, I think I actually broke this down in another video, but since no one watches my videos, let's talk about it now. One of the scenes that happens that's kind of lightly weird, at least in my opinion, is Jack and Wendy are in bed, and there's a little foreplay going on. And I think it's in like Wendy's narrative, and they end up having sex. Now, what's weird to me in this, like obviously they're a married couple, you know, it's late at night, their son's in bed, they're watching over this hotel, they're gonna have sex, right? Like, that's totally normal. Justin, what's your problem? The way in which it's described is just a little weird. It's just a little off-putting to me. They're supposed to be a married couple, but the way that King describes it just makes it a little awkward. How can you make sex between a married couple awkward? I don't know, ask Stephen King, because he pulled it off. Also, you have to remember, I've only seen the film to this point. Who plays Jack in the film? Jack Nicholson. Who plays Wendy? Shelley Duvall. This scene is not in the movie, but can you just imagine the scene of Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall in bed? Danny covering his eyes when he sees the twins. Me, if I actually had to see Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall hooking up in bed, that would be pretty horrific. But again, I said it was light. The other thing, again, there's a few. There's this early on in the book. Apparently, Jack's doing work. He's doing yard work outside of the hotel. Another thing that's not in the film. Also, have you ever noticed how Jack's supposed to be the one? He's supposed to be the caretaker of the hotel, and Wendy's the one that's doing all the work. You ever notice that? I love the film, but even I've noticed that. Uh, so at one point, Jack is again. I'll delve into the more. Sorry, someone keeps walking by my window. Basically, he's outside doing yard work. He comes across a wasp's nest. Apparently, when he was younger, Jack used to have a wasp's nest in his own bedroom because he thought it was cool the way it looks and the dimensions that it is. So, after he gets rid of all the wasps, he makes sure that the thing is thoroughly clean. But remember, they're in the overlook. So, he gives it to Danny as a gift, and a bunch of wasps come out of the nest. And don't worry, he doesn't get stung, or I think he does get stung, but it's not a big deal. Nothing happens to Danny with the wasp's nest. What my problem is the excessive amount of times that we hear about this fucking wasp's nest after that chapter's over. It gets referenced at least a dozen times. Like, oh, remember Danny and the wasp's nest? And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, we're on chapter 18. What are you... That happened in like chapter 2. What are you talking about? Again, it's not controversial, but it's just kind of, to me, it's WTF. Like, why are we still talking about a goddamn wasp nest this far into the book? The final two things that are controversial in The Shining, way more than Jack fucking up his own face. There is a scene in the book. Actually, you know what? I'll make a nice transition for you. Do you know the scene in the movie of The Shining where Wendy's walking up the stairs and she looks in the doorway, and you know what I'm talking about? The guy in a bear suit that's performing fellatio on another guy in a suit who's sitting on the bed, and you ask yourself, what the fuck does that scene mean? A lot of people think that scene means that that's depicting Danny's being abused by his father. That's not what that means. I don't know why people think that, but that's not what it means. Because in the book, there is a character named Roger who dresses up in a bear suit. I think it's a bear suit. No, it's a dog suit in the book. And Horace Derwent, great party, isn't it? Again, who's not in the film. Horace Derwent was a caretaker of the hotel. He was like a proprietor. He messed around with gamblers and stuff. He would throw lavish parties at the Overlook. And apparently he swung both ways, and he was having an affair with Roger, this man in the dog suit. Roger is seen a few times throughout the Overlook by Danny. At one point, there's a scene in which Danny is confronted by Roger, and Roger says something so inappropriate to Danny that I'm not even going to repeat it on live because it's so fucked up. It's so fucked up that I don't understand why that doesn't get talked about, and that's not in there. But Jack messing up his own face is. That's all I'm going to say. I remember when I came across that scene in the book, I was floored. I think I was on the bus and I read it. I looked down and I was like, and I had to read it 2 more times, not because it was so fucked up, but because I couldn't believe what I was reading. It's like, why is that in there? Why would you have a character say that to Danny? Why, Stephen King? Why? And finally, last but certainly not least, racism. It is a topic that we've had for centuries, right? Decades. Why do I bring up racism? Because it's in The Shining. Dick Halloran's black. You know this. He's depicted as black in the film, played by the late, great Scatman Crothers, and he's black in the book. If you didn't know he was black in the book, Stephen King makes sure you know it for several reasons. Before I get to the obvious controversial thing, Uh, this book was written in 1979. The movie was made in 1980, I think. So Dick Halloran's got a very 70s black vibe to him, based off the language that he uses. But if you still weren't sure, if you still weren't certain of the fact that Dick Halloran is black, Stephen King reminds you by using the N word freely. Now, I heard this as a joke years ago. I feel like the joke states that every white person is allowed to use the N word once. This is a joke, by the way. And they're allowed to use it once. But if you read a Stephen King novel, such as The Shining, or you watch a Quentin Tarantino film, you feel like they abuse that privilege and ruin it for anybody that wanted to use the word. I don't use the word. I certainly don't use it in my novels because there's no, just no. I'm not going to do that. People already don't read my novels. I really don't need them boycotting my novels because I randomly throw in the N word. Towards the end of the book, spoiler alert, Dick Halloran doesn't die in the book. Uh, if you know the layers to The Shining, you know that Stanley Kubrick's, it was his idea to kill off Dick Halloran, to which Stephen King was furious about. But at the end of the book, Dick Halloran gets Wendy and Danny, and they're cold because it's freezing cold outside. And he decides, because I think they're on the cat there, the winter cat there, the vehicle, and he stops at a small shed that's just a little bit past the hotel, and he goes into the shed because he knows that's where blankets are. When Dick Halloran goes into that shed, he is called the N-word. He is called other things that I didn't even know were racial slurs. And again, when I read this, I was floored. I asked myself, okay, I understand that it's toward the end of the book, and I understand that it's trying to like get into the head of Dick Halloran. But why do you think it's okay to throw around racial slurs? And on top of that, slurs that most people don't even know exist or forgot about. That people don't think of that, you know. When people think racial slurs, they're thinking of the main ones, right? Like, not that you go around thinking about racial slurs. That's my point. So when you hear one that you've never heard before, you're like, yes, I learned something today, but I didn't want to learn it. That's my full disclosure and my thoughts on the Shining novel. Like, there's a lot more controversial things than Jack just pounding his own face. We go back to it for a little bit. Obviously, we already talked about the number one scene. But remember, my friend said that she had read it. Read it. From what I remember, she told me that there's a lot of awkward scenes with Beverly. That's the female character. A lot of controversial things with her father. Apparently, her father says some of the most fucked up things a father could say to a daughter. I'm not going to say them because I don't actually know what they are because she didn't tell me that. But she's like, you get the idea, the nature of it. Now, if you have any, whatever you're thinking right now in your head, yeah, that's probably in the novel. That's what was said to Beverly by her father. And again, Stephen King, I'm not going to sit here and say I understand why you put it in the novel because I don't. That's not okay. That's beyond taboo. That doesn't need to be in a horror novel. But that's more scary than a slasher coming at you with a knife. Is it though? There's a difference between shock and horror. Just saying. Also, there's a lot of, I guess, the language that's used. is also controversial. Take that for what it is. What it is. Carrie. We go back to Carrie now. So obviously you know about the scene that I just told you, which I didn't even know was a thing. But again, my friend has recently read. I think she read Carrie right before she read it. I've seen Carrie enough times. Hell, I even have a shirt for Carrie. Not wearing it right now, obviously. But you know how the story goes, right? So remember the scene in the film where she has her period and they all laugh at her. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? So imagine that in the book times 30, times 50. Let's go times 50. How can you make that seem more disturbing, awkward, and weird? Leave it to Stephen King to do it because he did. There's also another scene in which the mother. Now, if you know Stephen King, as I've been telling you about him, if you know Carrie, if you've seen the film, you know how insanely weird at the end of the film the mother gets. The mother pretty much has an orgasm and gets off on getting struck with knives from her telekinetic daughter. But apparently, according to my friend, the mother's actions and words are even more disturbing than that of a religious nut that she's depicted in the film. I don't know how you can make someone that even more crazy than that, but leave it to Stephen King. We move on. We're almost done. Bear with me. Misery. We talked about this. Justin, we already talked about this. There was another scene in Misery. Because again, I told you at the beginning that my friend had read all these novels. Justin, why haven't you read them? There's no excuse why I haven't read a Stephen King novel. But now I have one, and it's this. This is why I won't read a Stephen King novel. Outside of The Shining. I have Revival in my room. You think I'm picking that shit up? Doubtful. So in Misery, apparently, there's another thing to talk about. Paul Sheldon has to go to the bathroom. Now, I'm just going to throw it out there. Why? Or either he has to go to the bathroom or he has to get off. Either way, why is that in a novel? Why are you putting it in there? If it's not an erotica, it doesn't need to be in a damn book. Both of them don't need to be in a book. They don't. But apparently, there's a scene in the book in which Paul Sheldon's got to do one of the two, and it's described in such a way that I think his balls are being talked about. And my friend even told me, she's like, Justin, I didn't ask for this, and I don't know who would, but Stephen King's decided to go into detail about Paul Sheldon's balls for like a page and a half. Why? Can you imagine if that was in the damn film? Like, can you imagine Kathy Bates just no? Like, that's one. Yeah. We move on. We're almost done. Pet Cemetery. Now, I added this because there really isn't a controversy as far as I know in Pet Cemetery. My friend didn't read that one yet. At least I don't think she did. Or maybe she did. I don't know. But I thought I would add it for two reasons. Because the film, obviously, the kid dies. That's why I wrote it down. Because the kid's 5. Most kids are 5 in Stephen King novels. And Stephen King decides, hey, I'm going to kill the kid off. Stephen King also has a fascination with trucks. Did you know that? Maximum Overdrive, not a book, great Stephen King film. He also did another one called Trucks, I think, a few years later. But anyway, why am I bringing up trucks? Because if you've seen Pet Cemetery, that's how little Gage dies. He gets hit by a fucking semi. At least Stephen King didn't show it. But then, of course, the great Herman Munster, the guy that played Herman Munster, plays Judd or Jed in that. Sorry if I messed the name up. And of course, he tells the father, don't. He tells him about the pet cemetery and goes, "Oh, bad things happen here. Don't bury your loved ones here." So why would you tell someone about something? Like, don't do that when you kind of like. I never understood that dynamic of that. So why would you tell him about the pet cemetery and what it does, knowing full damn well that he's going to do it? Well, of course, he probably didn't anticipate his kid and his wife dying, but anyway, in the film, the kid is terrifying, isn't he? It's been a while since I've seen Pet Sematary, but I can still see the kid holding that knife. That was rent-free in my head when I choose to think about it. And it's scary. So that's pretty scary. But my point is, it's controversial in the sense of, like, hey, Stephen King's gonna have a 5-year-old get killed by a freaking semi-truck. Crazy. Freaking crazy. And then he brings him back to life, and of course the kid tries to kill him. And then his wife dies. I forgot how his wife died. Again, it's been a while since I've seen it. And the remake, I won't even get into the remake, but in the remake they have the daughter get killed, not the little kid. I forgot there was a daughter in the first one, I'll be totally honest. But then his wife comes back, so he decides to bury his wife, knowing full well, like, if you knew your kid was coming after you, why the fuck would you bring your wife back to it? Because at that point, he's probably done. He's like, well, my kid's dead, my wife's dead. What point do I have? I have that daughter of mine, but at this point, she's probably a lost cause. I'm going to bring my wife back so she can make us all family again. Right? Is that the conclusion of Pet Cemetery? I don't know. That's the only reason I threw that in there, though. Also, Pet Sematary 2, underrated. Edward Furlong, the guy from Sleepy Hollow and Highlander, playing the sheriff. And finally, Gerald's Game. I wasn't familiar with this, but apparently Gerald's Game starts with a very controversial scene in which a couple is having some very kinky sex in a bedroom. They're on a bed. The guy has handcuffed the girl to the bed, and apparently he's trying to rape her. And again, I don't know too many details about it, but when you start a book off with a rape scene with kinky sex, I mean, if we're talking 50 Shades of Grey, you're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this, right? This is totally normal. This is natural. But if it's a Stephen King novel, you're probably, at least in my opinion, nope, I'm good. I'm not even going to read any further. I'm not even going to watch any further. I don't need to see this. Right? You don't care. I wish I could tell you more about Gerald's Game, but I don't really feel like. My point is, it starts off with rape. And when a book starts with rape, at what point in a person's mind are they like, you know what, I'm going to continue this book further? Because that's a totally normal and natural thing to do. Plus it being a Stephen King novel, I'm good. This has been Analyzing Stephen King Novels with yours truly, Justin Bienvenu. I hope I've enlightened you to the awkward, taboo, controversial, ridiculous, asinine, and crazy unnecessary moments in Stephen King novels. If I have deterred you away from Stephen King novels, I'm sorry. If I put you onto them, I'm sorry. And if you already knew this information but you forgot, you're welcome. Now, like me, it can live rent-free in your head when you choose to not want to think about it. Do stay tuned for some of my other videos. I'm actually going to be going live tomorrow for another video. I want to try to get into the rhythm of doing more videos with you guys. We're going to have a little not lighthearted, a little less controversial. It's still horror, but I'll even give you the topic I'd like to do here. Oh, my tablet's about to die, so I'll just end this now. But I think tomorrow I'll do my top 5 either favorite horror films, least liked horror films, or underrated. We'll do one of those 3. But thank you for watching, and until tomorrow, until next time.